The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. Hi, I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I'm speaking with Dr. Andrew Hartz of the Open Therapy Institute. And today you were having some thoughts around how therapy and therapeutic concepts and formulations can be helpful in understanding how people are becoming so dysregulated over issues like socio-political controversies and positions. And I would like to hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think the way that I would put it is like, I think that everybody feels like there's a lot of real instability and craziness and emotion dysregulation in our culture, in the world right now. And I think that there's this unique way where the mental concepts from mental health, from psychology, from the therapy fields have a unique ability to articulate and describe why this is happening, and also provide really effective solutions to this problem. And I don't think the mental health field is really leading with this. I actually don't know that much is being offered around this at all right now. But I think there's a really, really unique opportunity to use ideas of the field to understand what's happening and respond effectively to it. So like, I think, there's different. I think that the main punchline, if I was going to say one thing, it's that what you can't talk about, it becomes hard to think about it. And then you're likely to be dysregulated about it. The things that you can't talk about are the things that people have poor reflective functioning on, they get emotionally dysregulated on, they use cognitive distortions on them. That's when people engage in dissociation, in repression, in splitting, in reaction formation. And that's when people get extremely dysregulated, and you get these kinds of like spirals of counterproductive behaviors and things like that. And so we want to look, if I was a therapist and I'm treating the United States or the West or whatever is my patient, one of the first things I'm always going to think about is, what can we not tolerate talking about? What can we not tolerate thinking about? What can we not tolerate feeling? Where's the block? Because it's usually the things that we can't talk about, that we can't feel, that's what's throwing everything else out of balance. So I think that's just a really useful framework to thinking about, why do people get symptoms in whatever the symptoms are. That's just always a worthwhile question. And right now, it's really clear that the political stuff, especially the identity politics stuff, people have a really poor time talking about it. I think increasingly they hate talking about it. It's painful. It's frustrating. They feel incredibly stuck. They're uncomfortable saying things that they think, even if they think they're obvious moral truths or obvious realities, they are afraid to talk about them. And a lot of people repress those thoughts and feelings. And that's why they all come out sideways. And when the distortions and the repression become severe enough, there's enough stuff that you're repressing and distorting and we can't talk about, that's when the dysfunction really starts to ramp up and become just an obvious problem. And I think everybody knows, I mean, there's a reason why we reach so often for language about the world is crazy, or Trump derangement, mass psychosis, mass hysteria. There's a reason why people are reaching for this language. It's because they can kind of observe that there's something that feels like really distorted, really dysregulated, sometimes even unhinged, unstable, that's happening, that's driving our politics, that's driving our culture. And but they don't have a real good formulation of exactly what it is. And I think it'll be helpful for us to like dive into the details about exactly what are the things that people can't tolerate thinking and feeling about. But just having that framework of
Mhm.
the inability to talk about these things is driving the symptoms. And at the same time, it's going to be the treatment is learning ways to talk about this in a mature,
Mhm.
more regulated way. And so if our profession, I think, or the mental health profession really has this ability to help people learn to talk about difficult topics and start to tolerate being able to feel and reflect on and give voice to difficult feelings. And that's exactly what's needed
Mhm.
right now. I don't think it's just not. I know that there are like podcasters and people say stuff on Twitter, but I don't see it's not quite the right process that's needed
Mm.
to treat. It might do some things that are helpful, but it's not quite the right process.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of several things, just examples from my own experiences in with difficult topics. So one thing you said was you don't think that the mental health field is really leading with this, and I think you're absolutely right. In fact, they're kind of leaning into the problem in a really
Right,
significant and concerning way.
right,
And just to draw an anecdote or a couple of anecdotes from my own experience as a counseling student, um, I was told that we know we're not training counselors who can work with the Trump supporter. And so that's a very big
right,
thing.
right,
We can't even talk about the things that might make a person do something as heinous as vote for Trump. Is the kind of message you were getting. It was these
right,
people. So it's a perfect encapsulation of the thing that you're describing, where there's something that you can't talk about. We could not talk about what pros and cons might lead a person to make that choice. It was if they made that choice, they're just in kind of a black box for us and they're off to the side and we can't go there. And then there was this other experience that I've talked quite a bit about in my training where the racialized education that we were receiving, when I tried to talk about nuance in this respect, it was shut down hard in my
right,
in my class. It was like there were ad hominem attacks thrown at me. The teacher cried and told us it wasn't a safe space. We couldn't have these
right,
conversations here. So and this was just a person who, and I think I'm a fairly reasonable person. You might not agree with everything I have to say, but I'm a fairly reasonable person and I'm not coming out the gate like attacking
right, right,
this.
right,
I'm trying to be diplomatic. This was not tolerated. So when you say that there are things we can't talk about, the very first thing I thought was, well, they're talking about them all the time, but no, they're not. They're talking up, they're giving one side, one very black and white. It speaks to that splitting phenomenon you were addressing.
right.
And there's this nuance that cannot be talked about right now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like just to like pause and link this back to like mental health theory. So
Mhm.
like just thinking about like what happens to kids when they grow up in a family that has rules about certain emotions that can't be expressed or talked about, or certain topics that can't be expressed or talked about. Well, those become exactly the issues that the kids are likely to become very dysregulated about.
Mm.
And then potentially develop symptoms as a result of either an excess or an inability to process those whatever that content is. So you can really see how you're in a program that is setting these rules about what can and can't be said that are they're likely to produce pathology. I mean, and
Mhm.
and I know it's like it's coming from the people in the mental health field, but it's totally contrary to all the
Mhm.
principles of the field prior to this ideology. It's actually like really the opposite of
Mhm.
everything that was taught about free association and open dialogue with the whole treatment. That's the whole
Mhm.
point.
It's the
Yeah.
opposite of any college experience I had had up until that point
Oh,
as
really?
well. Because even in education, higher education, my experience was that I was unaware of any big taboos that we could not bring up
Mm,
in in courses where this was relevant. I think that's contributing to this sense that you're describing, that people feel like the world is crazy. There's something
Yes.
that's really changed.
And I think it is really, if you want to think about what are the things that can't be expressed, I think the splitting framework is really helpful, where
Mhm.
it is talking about any way, any bias or aggression towards white people, any positive cultural trends or dynamics among white people.
Mhm.
Those are totally forbidden third rail topics. Similarly, if you're going to talk about any negative trends or behaviors in a non-white racial group, and I think it's similar for men and women. I still think, like, to talk about strength or value and masculinity, if you go into the specifics, I think men or masculinity offer this or tend to, on average, do better at this. That's still a very taboo question in a lot of
Mhm.
places in society, or that there's mistreatment of men in these ways. Those are unacceptable, or that there are these negative trends and dynamics related to femininity.
Mhm.
You can think of others, but it tends to be along that splitting framework. There's one group that has all the weaknesses and gets attacked, and they're the privileged oppressors, and they cannot have any strengths. And the aggression directed at them or discrimination directed at them, bias against them, it never matters. And it's seen as immoral to talk about.
Mhm.
And then there's the other groups that have to get praised and celebrated, and to talk about any negative trend or dynamic or anything problematic there is totally unacceptable. So that really is the content that people can't express.
Mhm.
And that splitting is such a particularly dysregulating emotion, because it really pushes people into fights when you're like framing, groups of millions of people, millions and millions, sometimes even billions of people, and it's like in the all or nothing terms.
Mhm.
Um, it's so aggressive, and it pushes the other side to respond, and
Mhm.
then you get this, oh, how dare you do that? And it
Mhm.
just really pulls for aggression and conflict. And it's so distorted. It's so incredibly um, inaccurate.
Mhm.
And so you really have to repress and reject and dissociate tons of information to sustain those worldviews.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's just an but even people who recognize, I think the places, less talking about the most aggressive people on the left. Think about the people who are in the middle, or people who recognize that there's a problem
Mhm.
with some of these ideologies. And maybe includes listeners to this podcast. These people, it's like us,
Mhm.
we are not great at talking constructively about these topics.
Mhm.
And I think I know a lot of people who if it comes up, they shut down, or they get way too angry.
Mhm.
And they either go super aggressive, or they shut down, or they get really anxious and they say, I agree with that, but there's no way I could ever say that to anyone out loud. Um,
Mhm.
or they just are, they can't process it. I think there's this concept in the in therapy that's called reflective functioning. And
Mhm.
it's basically the ability to think clearly about what you're thinking and feeling and
Mhm.
what you're experiencing. And the ability to say, there's a real difference between somebody with dysregulated anger, for example.
Mhm.
They're just flooded, and they're just like, I hate you, and there's
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But when you have reflective functioning, you can actually say, I'm angry right now because I think that what you said to me was actually really hurtful.
Mhm.
And when you're that's a high reflective functioning place. Now, the emotion is the same. They're both angry, but one of them has this reflective functioning ability. Even they don't have to say it, and they don't have to talk in a corny therapy way about what they're feeling, but just the ability to recognize, like, I think that was pretty disrespectful, and that's making me pretty angry. And like,
Mhm.
maybe I need to take a few minutes, or maybe we need to, like, I need to tell you that I don't think you should talk to me that way or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Like,
So just
yeah,
drawing from that, and I want
yeah,
to just bring that to
sure.
something really concrete because I'm curious about how you would frame this or direct this if you were working with someone. So, and I'll use myself again just as an anecdote for something concrete. When this was
Mhm.
going on for me in my program, and I was being frankly bullied by a professor around these concepts. I was really dysregulated, I'll say. I mean, I can remember crying. I can remember sitting on my bedroom floor just crying, like, how do I do this? I've already got this much money invested in this program. I've gone to the lengths that I've gone to organize my life so that I can be in graduate school. How do
Right,
I go forward and should I pull out? And it was a very confusing place. And that lasted for a little while. And I think I had what you're saying with that reflective functioning because I was able to say I am very confused because I'm being bullied by a teacher around concepts around race and and I don't feel like I can speak freely in this program, and that's causing me a lot of anger and sadness and grief and confusion.
right.
But I still was really struggling with those feelings. Those feelings were I did not know what to do with that at that moment. And when you're talking about people who become like if you try to talk about this with moderate individuals who are recognizing a concern and they might become very angry or very anxious or say I want to talk about this but I don't think I can because I'm scared to speak out about this with people around me when this comes up.
Right.
How do you in practice help people to move through that state of emotional confusion and overwhelm to something where they can mm, express themselves in a more regulated fashion and
Yeah.
what's the process like from a clinical.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the confusion is a great insight because I think that's really what I would hit on. And I felt the same thing. I think when I first encountered these ideologies, I didn't have I didn't have an immune system for organized race and gender hate
Yeah.
coming from my teachers directed at
Mhm.
me. I didn't have any tools or framework. So it just kind of like went straight through. I didn't
Mhm.
have any armor of like being able to recognize like these are really messed up people who
Mhm.
are for whatever like complicated reasons they need to like hurt and humiliate other people in these race and gender categories
Yeah.
that they despise and they need to scapegoat to give their life meaning or to exonerate themselves or whatever. Like I didn't really have that, and I think I kind of and so I think I went along with what I was being taught, way more than I should have at the beginning until it kind of got to the point where I was like, wow, this is really awful. And it took me time. I think it was a number of years before I formulated and I wrote my first paper, which was about splitting. And it
Mhm.
was like, this is splitting. That's really, and that was like, once I had that concept,
Mhm.
of, oh, these are people, I've never heard one person say anything, the remotest empathy or positivity about men or white people ever.
Mhm.
And they say vicious things about those groups every day,
Mhm.
and they praise and celebrate every other group. This is splitting.
Mhm.
I know what this is, and this is a total borderline behavior, and it's super hateful, and it's not true. And but that getting to that point took I mean, I'm sorry, it's like it probably took 2 or 3 years of
Mhm.
reflection. And that as somebody who was, and I think for me, I also was using my space. I think I was in psychoanalysis at the time. Um, I don't know if I had ended my psychoanalysis at that point, but I was like using that space a lot to formulate what I was thinking. And I was lucky enough to have an analyst who encouraged those types of reflections and could handle them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but it was I needed to talk through it and think through it in a place that was confidential first
Hmm.
so that I didn't need to like immediately defend my ideas online. I don't think it would have been helpful for me to get in Twitter fights with lots of people. I don't think it would have been, I wasn't ready to like write articles about it quite yet or do a podcast about it. I needed a confidential space. Whereas like legally this stuff can't get out
Right.
so that I can talk through like feeling angry
Hmm.
and all the different things about like and feeling more racialized than I'd ever felt. Like I
Right.
didn't really have like a racialized sense of self that was really beat into me by the social justice
Right.
activists because just years and years of this bombardment, it was like, and it's like, I don't really want to have a racialized identity, but it was kind of unavoidable
Hmm. Hmm.
because and even again, like not having an immune system to it, just like I remember feeling the changes of this process in my body.
Mm.
I could like feel it go in and
Yeah.
change me. And as like this is like a really deep poisonous thing that they're injecting into millions of people. And but I so I, but so th that's basically the answer is in a way. I mean, we could get into some of the nitty gritty, but like I think people who have these types of experiences, they need some type of often a confidential space
Hmm.
because this stuff is too radioactive. You can't just like talk and maybe you have a really good friend group that you super trust and you can make risky comments about taboo stuff with. And if you do, more power to you. And, you know, but for a lot of people, they feel alone. They don't feel comfortable talking about it with family or loved ones, even. And you need some type of place with some confidentiality where you can start to test the waters, where you don't have to be right about everything, where you can figure out what you think and feel and talk through it.
Hmm.
And in order to get your head screwed on straight so that you can think about how to respond. Um, but that was so much of the reason why I wanted to found the Open Therapy Institute to begin with, was like people can't talk about these really, really important things if there was a place people could go where I can talk confidentially with people and figure out what I think and feel about this stuff in my own way, that would have a massive ripple effect socially throughout society where people would be able to speak up more assertively and maturely about everything. But they can't if they can't get their head screwed on straight. And in particular, and I know this is something that we wanted to talk about at some point, but in particular, groups.
Hmm.
I thought groups were like individual therapy, maybe if somebody's like, they don't feel ready for a group, but as like groups in particular, as just like, that's how you build reflective functioning is
Hmm.
by talking and having it reflected back to you and ask questions. And
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that, when you described that you had that analyst that you could speak with. And I did not have a therapist when I was going through this, but I did find CTA. So that's another
oh,
group of therapy professionals who have come together to talk about these things. And through connecting with other professionals who had either gone through this in their careers or in their education, or students who were going through it as well, I had that group experience as well as the individual. I had Jennifer Friend, who
yeah,
founded Solid Ground with me, is
right.
one of the people who helped me to sort of get my head straight on this. And James Esses, who is a UK
Yes.
counselor trainee who's been embroiled in a lot of strife around many of these same issues, was kind enough to meet with me and talk with me. And I remember just being completely scattered and all over the place. I couldn't even tell a coherent narrative because it was so confusing to me. But having somebody to speak with where you could really just lay it all out and have them reflect some of the themes that they're hearing back to you was invaluable. So, one of the things that I think is really harmful for people right now is people who are confused about these same sorts of experiences in their own lives often will try to find a therapist to talk with. And when they find a therapist who's embroiled in that same thinking, who's deeply ideological,
Yes.
it's like gaslighting on a really major scale that compounds the hurt that the person is already experiencing. And so services like Open Therapy Institute, who, having the opportunity to write in and ask for a referral to a therapist who's not going to be plugged into the ideology, who's really
Right,
going to
right.
be open as per the name, is so valuable right now for
And
people.
and the stuff that and it's this the stuff that ends up being most useful to talk about therapy is the stuff that you can't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really so much of what the value is. So especially if there's things that people have strong feelings about, but they can't talk about, you get a big payoff for using that space to talk about exactly that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about, a lot of times people think about therapy as like just like you go in and you get advice,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like to develop reflective functioning, you really need to ex- practice. Like you need to like figure out what you feel, have it reflected back and develop that skill
Mm-hmm.
to like be able to formulate what you're feeling and why and what's happening interpersonally and why and be comfortable with that. That's really a kind of a practice that you have to develop with another person often. And and people are trying to do this in a number of different ways. I mean, it's interesting how online these movements
Mm-hmm.
are. They're so online. They're not in person very much. And it's because one of the reasons is it's really, really hard to get a group going that is, what are the things? I mean, just even at Open Therapy Institute, people are worried about moles. Somebody's going to like spy and then dox everyone or something. You're worried about people that are too dysregulated or crazy. Like there's kind of like a crazy magnet that somebody's there going to pick fights
Mm-hmm.
or and it's like it's it's indicative of how charged and how unable we are to talk about this stuff. Like I think if we were going to do a Harry Potter discussion group, I don't think that would necessarily be so hard to do. But with this stuff, people get so dysregulated so fast. It's really valuable to have a facilitator
Mm-hmm.
who knows something, who can admit people to the group and kind of facilitate the conversation. And if there need to be rules, ask people to leave if they
Mm-hmm.
can't be in it. Like it's really useful. And to have a confidentiality frame and things like that. Like that's why I think this space is so uniquely valuable for precisely the things that we need help with
Mm-hmm.
as a society right now.
Absolutely. Well, I I think that that might be a good place to pause unless you have any other thoughts that we didn't get in about this. I think there's of course there's more to say, but that feels like maybe a good place to cap it off.
Yeah, and I think it's like at least it's the opening of like what's the value of this process for precisely this historical time. And
Hmm.
I would just say like for anybody from to my mind, anybody who's isolated because of their views, who is emotionally struggling, maybe they're self-censoring at work or they're stigmatized or they're attacked or they like any of those people could
Hmm.
probably benefit from spaces like this. And the real vision of the Institute was helping to get a community of professionals that could provide this.
Hmm.
But I think what's needed. Sorry, just the last thing I'll just say is like I think like once these groups start, what you're going to see actually is as this stuff gets opened up and processed,
Hmm.
there's all of these hidden problems and conflicts and insights and experiences that like we still haven't figured out. Like
Hmm.
I think we haven't processed this stuff nationally or culturally, and so I think there's just a lot of unfolding that needs to
Hmm.
happen to
Hmm.
really get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And we have been we've had the project of Solid Ground going for a little over 2 years now. It was 2 years in January, and that's groups that meet in
Mhm.
online through Zoom. Right now, we have 4 to 5 groups per week, and it's a wonderful space where people are able to go into those nuanced places. We don't find it to be a just a counterpoint to angry at the woke or whatever. It's more that it's a deeper dialogue about how these things are shaping their lives and how they can move forward in a positive way. So there is that exploration of nuance, and I feel like
Yes.
that's really important.
It's really important because if you're angry all the time, that's not really where you want to be with your
Mm-mm.
life. You're not going to be effective at addressing change, and you're probably not going to be very happy.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's really important to understand, like, what is it that's causing that?
Hmm.
Like it's probably like things that were painful or things that were unfair or invalidating or whatever. And the more you can articulate that, it can actually like not only free people from anger, but enable them to be more effective and assertive rather than just venting online and like maybe alienating people. You're going to
Yeah.
be more persuasive and more effective at really creating real change and probably having a more fulfilling life if you unpack some of that. And that usually involves articulating exactly why, like you're talking about your training, for example, and it's like there are
Hmm.
all these kinds of like traps and paradoxes and humiliations that they kind of like bake into this stuff, into these DEI trainings. And it's like just unpacking one of those things. Okay, let me give you a quick example. I know we want to wrap up, but so I remember one of the exercises that we didn't do, but was proposed was it was a DEI training with no dialogue, where you just look into each other's eyes.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to look into a woman of color's eyes as she feels good about herself for forgiving me for being a white male. And I have to look back at her eyes as if I take that seriously at all. Like she's going to be looking down at me
Huh.
in a forgiving way, proud of herself that she's able to forgive me. You can imagine the look
Yeah.
and like and just it there was something it just shows how how much emotion and how many ideas are communicated through a phrase like white tears or white rage or something that like contains layers and layers of hostility and negative stereotypes and
Hmm. Hmm.
invalidation and a viciousness to them. And it's like there's and even just a nonverbal looking in somebody's eyes ritual where you're kind of like, well, what's the problem with that?
Hmm.
And it's like I can see in their face how proud they are that they think they're so good because they're looking down at me and forgiving me for being a white privileged male uh asshole that they're good enough to forgive, and that I have to take that in as if it's anything other than a bigoted, hateful, negative stereotype of me
Hmm.
that they're so blind to that they're actually think they're a hero for looking at me with that gaze. It's like and what's communicated through the gaze. So just as an example of like how much really people are flooded with these experiences that
Yeah.
have this in him,
Yeah.
and their response is fuck you.
Yeah.
But like they don't I don't think it's really been unpacked exactly what's happening. And I think even if you were going to make a lawsuit, you
Hmm.
can't win a lawsuit on you looked at each
Right.
other.
Right.
That's not a lawsuit thing, but it's full of hate.
Well, it's interesting because there's so much loaded into that. And if
Yeah.
you've been sitting in a class where you've been taught these kinds of
Yes.
these catchphrases and concepts about white privilege and white women's tears and you know um, using your privilege and don't speak but also speak. Silence is violence, but your words are violence, and all this kind of crap
Right, right.
that
Yeah.
really loads this very racialized power dynamic into the interaction. So even a nonverbal interaction is then it's infused with all these projections. So you're sitting there, and maybe that woman is is not thinking that. Maybe she's not
Well,
because
we didn't do it, but
but like
yeah.
if that were
Right.
to happen in that hypothetical, maybe she's not. Maybe she's thinking, Oh my God, I hope this guy doesn't think that I think all this crap that's been put out there. I feel so awkward or whatever she's thinking. But you've been preloaded with all of this stuff and she's been preloaded. And so it's created this well of suspicion between you that's like palpable in the
Yeah.
room. And that is like when you're talking about feeling the poison go in,
Yeah.
that's the poison going in.
That's the
It's
poison. All the
totally
suspicion
charging
and
everything.
all the suspicion and division. Well, like, I mean, I had been in the groups with these
Yeah, so
people.
you
I
knew who
had a
she
sense.
was and
I
how
knew
she
who she
talked.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, like, honestly, I was like, if I were gonna do that,
Mm.
I think my eyes would have been like lightning. I would have looked straight through her soul. I think it would have been, I think I would have given her something to remember.
Yeah.
But I, but, you know, that's it's like and I think it was something about the you would see the women, they were almost all black women who ran these, and they were just the least thoughtful people I've ever met in my
Oh
life.
gosh. Yeah.
And I just had never I don't think that they could even come close to thinking about how incredibly evil and destructive what they were doing was.
Yeah. What is
But
that? I mean, maybe that's a whole nother conversation, but I'm curious, like, what is that from from your perspective as a psychologist and just from your experience, that joy in bureaucratic violence, like that little bit of like that sadism that people get when they
there
get
was
power over another.
there were definitely a lot of people. I think there was a range, but there were I think the people who want to run the aggressive DEI trainings.
Well, they're like the lady at the
Uh,
DMV and the lady
they
who
have
sat at the
well, they
school
have
desk. They're all kind of the same.
well, there was a big uh a lot of them seem to have an axe to grind.
Yeah.
They were and whatever they had experienced, they wanted to get revenge on these kids that
Yeah.
they now had power over. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there were people that were more clueless and not as thoughtful about it, and maybe didn't recognize. Like, I think there were people that kind of, oh, DEI is good, and they weren't very thoughtful.
Yeah.
And then there were people who you could tell they had they really they were there to hurt people.
Yeah.
So I saw both.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was thinking about my class. I know we're kind of just getting off on stories, but my class where this was so present, the worst of my classes, it was the DEI training disguised as a class in a counseling course. Um, there was a black woman in that class, and I liked her. I'd had her for another class the quarter before. We didn't know each other very well. She and I wondered, as this is she was the only black person. I think that there were maybe a Hispanic or two, a Hispanic person or two, but most of the people in the class were white as we talked, and the teacher was white as we talked about how bad white
Right.
people were, and this kind of putting of people of color up on a pedestal and
Right.
trashing white people. And I wondered, the woman who was black, she was kind of quiet. She never really engaged very much. She didn't seem super uncomfortable, but she didn't also vociferously speak up in favor of any of the things that were being said. And I thought, what a crazy experience for her. I wonder how she feels about this because she's basically being she's she's kind of the she's without soliciting this, she's receiving this well of kind of sympathetic, uh,
Right.
putting on a
Right. Right.
pedestal. It's a very strange thing. And I don't know how I would have felt if that had been about me or a group that I was associated with and so visibly associated
Right.
with. Like you can't, it was like she
Right.
didn't
Right.
ask for
Right.
this. And
Right.
yet, and I just wondered what was that like for her? Was that something where she felt good about that? Was it something that was incredibly uncomfortable for her somewhere in the middle? It must have been confusing.
Yeah. Um, right. And I mean, and obviously, like, it's obviously like it goes without saying, but it's definitely true that like not every Black person, not every woman, not every
Hmm.
immigrant feels the same way about this stuff,
Right.
not even close. Um, and and not all white people feel the same way about it. And it's
Right.
just but I think it's just the fact that we're still that people it I mean it's 2025. People are still very afraid of talking about this. They're not
Hmm.
really able to do it. And the way to do it is to have places where people can talk in a
Hmm.
real, and I think and this is different from Twitter because you need to be able to see somebody's face, to put your ideas out there, to have them reflected back, and to have some type of processing that I don't think happens when it's just text on a screen and you don't have a personal connection where you can actually feel something together and start to get at what's causing it, and start to ultimately ideally let it go so that you can think about responding constructively, helping other people who've had the situation, not letting it rule your life. Not, often it's rebuilding social relationships where you can be yourself, or finding ways
Hmm.
to continue to have your friends that don't share your views, or whatever. Like it's like I don't know. I would think that there would be a huge demand for this because so many people have had experiences like this, and I don't see these services offered anywhere. But I think it's like there's a little bit of a feedback loop where like the services aren't offered because people aren't asking for it, and people aren't asking for it because the services aren't offered. And I think if there's a way of having this get out there, you can tell people have there's still millions and millions of people with lots of feelings about this who could benefit from it.
Yeah.
I think especially through groups.
I
Uh,
think you're absolutely right. I think the groups are really helpful, and there's a difference in quality of the interaction, as you're saying. Like if you're in a closed online forum, there's a
right.
little bit more of that natural conversational flow. Like we see that with Solid Ground. We have a locals forum. And then we also have, and I'll put these links in the description because I've talked about them. We'll also have links to Open Therapy Institute in the description. But we have a locals forum where members can post to each other. And we also have the synchronous groups where we meet. What I see in the locals forum versus what you see on something like Twitter is very different. It's more of a conversation. On Twitter or Facebook, there's this kind of mic drop sort of
Yeah,
quality
yeah.
to the way that people write their posts. Like, this has to be the last word on this. I'm going to try to really sum this up, which we don't really do when we talk to each other. We're not really summing things up. We're kind of exploring things and
Yeah.
exchanging things. And maybe you have a really good idea, a really great way to articulate something, and that has kind of a summing it up quality. But the flow of a conversation is just completely different to a post on a giant feed, on a giant, I don't know who's going to see this. So I have to be perfectly represented or represent my idea in this kind of closed way. And
Yeah.
it forces a rigidity, I think, into the interaction and into the statements that people make on those kinds of platforms.
Right. There's not a processing. There's kind of like you're supposed to know. And it's
Hmm.
like if you change your mind, that's a humiliation.
Oh yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great, that's like,
yeah,
oh man, he changed his mind. What a loser.
yeah. Yeah. When actually the opposite is really true. The
I,
flexibility to really take in and alter your schema is
yeah.
as a really it's a very indicative of a higher level thinking.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you, Andrew. This is a really
All right.
interesting topic, and I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks. Me too.